main lecture by Brother Mouhamad Reslan and Jama'ah Salah and an interactive activity run by Iftikhar. So just some housekeeping to begin. So if any of the women do want to leave, they can also leave from the side door. The bathrooms are to the right, and please only Barakah members in the kitchen. So to begin the program, please welcome Dave with the salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. وإن تبدوا ما في أنفسكم أو تخفوه يحاسبكم به الله. فيغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء. والله على كل شيء قدير. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you, Dave, for the recitation. Our main talk today will be about the science of pleasure, addiction, and happiness. Please welcome Mouhamad Reslan with a loud salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you to all of you who came on time. Inshallah you'll benefit from the introduction. Inshallah, look, we'll start with this talk and we'll take a break for Salat halfway through, inshallah, and then we'll continue afterwards and have a small segment. A few disclaimers before I start. Firstly, this talk is going to be very scientific in nature. We're going to cover some basics of neuroscience, so just bear with me. However, despite it being scientific in nature, I think it holds significant benefit for both our physical, mental and spiritual health, as will be clear in a minute, inshallah. Secondly, I want to say I am not a neuroscientist, obviously. I'm not an expert in psychology either. I pursued this knowledge for my own benefit, and I found it very useful to me, so I thought I'd share some of the basics with you as well, so that inshallah we can all benefit as well. Now, the area of neuroscience is very complicated. Even neuroscientists don't fully know what's going on. So what I'm going to share with you today is a very, very simplistic explanation to things, with a focus on pleasure, happiness and addiction. And although it's very simplistic, even having this simple understanding of how your brain works I believe is going to be very useful in changing bad habits and in understanding addiction, understanding why your body behaves a certain way, which will empower you to make better decisions in your life, inshallah. Okay, let's get started. Actually, before I get into the content, I do want to say this talk was inspired by two books. They're very famous books. You might have seen them or read them before. One is called Dopamine Nation. It's written by a psychiatrist. Her name is Dr. Anna Lembeck. She's done a lot of interviews and podcasts on the topic. Really, really valuable read. This book is more focused on actual patient stories and their battle with addiction and their journey to recovery. So it's really interesting. The second book is called The Hacking of the American Mind. The Science Behind the Corporate Takeover of Our Bodies and Brains by Robert Lustig. I think he's an endocrinologist, which means he specializes in hormones and things like that. I think he also worked in as a pediatrician. This one covers pretty much all the things I'm going to talk about today in a bit more detail. So it's a bit more of a general explanation of all the different neurotransmitters and hormones in our body, and a bit more about limbic capitalism, which I'll talk about in a sec. So, if you found my talk really boring or you just wanted to get a bit more detail, actually either way, I highly recommend you read these two books. If you haven't read a book in a while, trust me, these books will get you back into reading. They're very interesting and very, very beneficial. All right, let's get started. We obviously had the COVID pandemic a few years ago, and that was obviously a very difficult time for a lot of people. But I'm going to argue that that wasn't the real pandemic. There was a pandemic that existed before COVID, there was a pandemic that existed during COVID, and there's a pandemic that still exists after COVID. I say pandemic, I know pandemic relates to infectious diseases. That pandemic is the crisis of mental health, and closely related to that, the crisis of addiction. In the Islamic terminology, I believe addiction is a manifestation of hubb al-dunya, the love of the pleasures of this dunya. Let's read some statistics together. In the last 5 years, there's been increased use of antidepressants. In Australia, 17% of women use antidepressants, 10% of men use antidepressants. There's been an increase in the prevalence of mental health disorders. Again, these are statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. From 2007 to 2023, and this is young people, aged 16 to 24, 26% in 2007 had a mental health disorder. In 2023, that's increased to 39%. Now, regardless of the reasons why it might have increased, some people might say we're diagnosing better. Just think about that. Almost 40% of young people aged 16 to 24 will have a mental health disorder that lasts at least 12 months. That's like a third, almost a half of people. Globally, between 2007 and 2019, adolescents reporting a major depressive episode increased by 60%. Suicide death rate, again among young people, increased 56% in the last 13 years. Post-COVID anxiety and depression increased globally by 25%. Now let's look at some statistics around addiction and pleasure-seeking behavior. Approximately 50% of young adults play video games regularly. 50%. It's every second person in the room is playing video games on a regular basis. Now, the statistics on addiction are a bit lower. 8.5% under 18 are addicted. But let's be honest, how many people are honest about being addicted to things? I think these statistics are like totally underrepresenting the real percentage. This is a crazy one. And I looked at statistics for different countries, even like in Saudi Arabia. All of them are consistently above 80%. More than 85% of people watch or have watched pornography. Usually these surveys are done like the last 6 months or whatever. In the last 6 months the survey was done across all age groups. And when you look closer on the frequency of watching the pornography, usually about half of them are watching daily or weekly. This is the craziest one. In 2015, listen to this, from a single porn site. A single porn site was visited for 4.4 billion hours in total. 4.4 billion hours was spent on a single porn site in 2015. Just to put that into perspective, that's 500,000 years of cumulative time. And if you go by the scientists' estimates of how long Homo sapiens have been on Earth, which is 200,000 years, that's 2.5 times how long humans have existed, or Homo sapiens have existed on Earth. Just imagine if we spent 4.4 billion hours doing something else what we could have achieved. 10% people in the US have a drug use disorder at some point in their life. 6% of people are compulsive shoppers. The average person spends 5 years and 4 months of their life just scrolling on social media. 5 years. Dude, like you can get a whole degree in 5 years. You're just spending and doing this. 47% of US adults, and I'm sorry I'm getting US statistics, they're the most common ones. 47% are addicted to some sort of substance or behavior. Every second person, hopefully not in the room, but every second person that you meet is addicted to something. Is that a crisis or what? I'll let you draw your own conclusions. I'm not saying that addiction is the only reason why we have mental health issues. Obviously, mental health issues are complicated. Genetics plays a big role, trauma, life experiences, etc. But listen to these narrations from Imam Sadiq, alayhi salam, that are narrated in Al-Kafi. مثل الدنيا كمثل ماء البحر. The example of the world is like that of seawater. كلما شرب منه العطشان ازداد عطشا حتى يقتله. The more a thirsty person drinks from it, the thirstier he becomes until it kills him. Profound. Here's another one I want to share with you. Again from Imam Sadiq. I'll read the English just for brevity. He says, whoever has a heart attached to the world has three things attached to his heart. Endless sadness. So the translation is not that great, so maybe I'll read it Arabic. هم لا يفنى. وأمل لا يدرك. Unfulfilled desire. ورجاء لا ينال. An unachievable hope. Endless sadness. The person is attached to the dunya. Are you seeing a trend? So why is it that we have this addiction crisis? Why is everybody so addicted to drugs, to substances, to behaviors? One of the reasons is something that a historian called David Courtwright calls limbic capitalism. Limbic referring to our dopamine reward pathway, which we can talk about in a second. He defines limbic capitalism as follows. Limbic capitalism refers to a technologically advanced but socially regressive business system in which global industries, often with the help of complicit government and criminal organizations, encourage excessive consumption and addiction. In simple terms, big business hacking our mind to get us addicted to their products and services so they can make profit. And they use technology to achieve that. I've listed some examples here. We've got a lot to go through, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. This needs its own whole discussion, to be honest. Processed foods these days are all engineered to be addictive. People underestimate how addictive sugar is. Refined sugar is like cocaine. It's just a little bit weaker. They put refined sugar in everything. Neuromarketing. This is marketing that is designed to hack your limbic system, to take advantage of this dopamine reward pathway that we're going to talk about. So all you feel like is seeking and indulging in whatever products and services that they're selling you. And there's some examples. Coca-Cola uses facial coding. They look at your facial expressions and your eye movements when they show people their ads to see what is going to create the most engagement. Hyundai in 2011 or 2012 used that machine. It's called an EEG. They showed prototypes of their cars to people. They scanned their brain waves, if you like. And they're like, oh, this is the most stimulating. We'll make this prototype. There's been increased availability and potency of addictive substances. Opioids are stronger than ever. They're available as prescription medications. Nicotine, I mean, far out. I thought smoking was going to die out. Like, who still smokes these days? And then they made vapes. Now everybody's vaping. You think that's just a coincidence? They know what they're doing. Increased availability and potency of digital drugs, right? Ever since the internet came out, now with phones, we can access porn, video games, gambling, shopping, social media with absolutely no effort whatsoever. Just get your phone out, tap, 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 massive dopamine hits, massive endorphin hits, so much pleasure. How are you going to stop? And the other idea is the conflation of pleasure and happiness. If you Google definition of happiness, that's what I literally just did, I took the screenshot, you see at the bottom, similar, contentment, pleasure. What the hell? When was contentment and pleasure the same thing? And it's not just a Google translated definition. If you look at the history of the development of this idea, it's been conflated a long time ago. I just didn't want to get into it today. A classic example of big business taking advantage of this is McDonald's. I think they called it Happy Meal by chance. What's going to make you happy about eating junk food? It's all intentional. There's a big difference between happiness and contentment. Hopefully I don't need to explain it, but pleasure is exciting in nature, it's transient, it uses a totally different pathway in your brain. Happiness and contentment is more soothing, calming, it's everlasting. It's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to seek. However, I do want to make this point. We can't keep blaming others for our own problems. We can't put the blame on society. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us power, He gave us free will. We have to take responsibility for our own actions. We can't blame them for us watching pornography. We can't blame them for us wanting to eat Maccas. It's up to you. And my goal in this lecture tonight, at least, is to raise awareness and at least get into the basics of the neuroscience of our brain and how it works. Because if you have that knowledge, you'll be empowered to make better decisions in your life, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صل على محمد وآل محمد.
This is where the science begins. Sorry to all the uni students that are getting traumatized after leaving uni and they come to Barakah and they have to learn more science. I promise you this will be more interesting. So the discussion begins and is really centered around the dopamine, motivation and reward pathway. Okay, this is going to be one of the focuses of the talk. Dopamine is a chemical in your brain. It's called a neurotransmitter. It's like a chemical messenger. All right? It moves between cells in your brain called neurons and sort of bridges the gap, helps communicate messages and stimulate neurons to send more messages to other parts of the brain. Dopamine's main role in the motivation reward pathway, by the way, dopamine has many other roles in other parts of the brain. It coordinates movement and other things. I'll focus on the discussion tonight. It's going to be just on the motivation reward system, pleasure, happiness, etc. Its main role in this pathway is to drive motivation. It motivates you to seek out pleasure. It doesn't give you the pleasure. The pleasure comes from endogenous opioid peptides. For example, one endogenous opioid peptides, it's called endorphins, which probably maybe some of you are familiar with. These are chemicals that your brain produces that relieve pain and give you a feeling of euphoria, of pleasure. Now, Allah didn't create dopamine for no reason. It has a very important purpose. They've done studies on rats where they've knocked out the gene that makes dopamine, and these rats have had no will to live. Even when they were starving and they put food right in front of them, the rat wouldn't move. It had no motivation. But they fed the rat the food, it ate it and it enjoyed it. So this kind of verified the role of dopamine just in motivation. Now, your body normally produces dopamine at a tonic level, at a baseline level. And every now and then, when you need to take on a challenging task, or you need motivation to achieve a certain goal, your dopamine levels spike up a little bit, you get the motivation to do it, you do it, and then it goes back to baseline. For this whole talk, and in general, your body, just remember this, your brain and your body likes to keep a state of homeostasis, which just means it likes to keep everything balanced. Never wants to be too high, have too much of something or too little of something. And that's what I'm trying to demonstrate in this diagram on the right here. You want to keep your dopamine level somewhere in the middle, at an optimum range. You never want it to be too low, because then you have no motivation to do anything. and you never want it to be too high because then you'll be aggressive, anxious, and very irritable. Now there are three structures. There are three structures in the brain that are involved in the dopamine reward pathway that I want to talk about tonight. One is called the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA. Just remember the acronyms, VTA. This is where the dopamine in your brain is produced. Dopamine then travels to two other areas of your brain, the nucleus accumbens, this NA structure, and the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. The NA is very complicated. Again, I'm simplifying this. It does two things. One, it learns what feels good and what doesn't feel good. So for example, let's say I've never had a chocolate ice cream before. I have a chocolate ice cream, like, ooh, that tastes really good. Nucleus accumbens goes, bro, that's amazing. I'm gonna store this. Chocolate ice cream tastes amazing. A week later, I hear the ice cream van go off. I remember, ooh, ice cream. Nucleus accumbens goes, hey man, chocolate ice cream tastes really, really good. I'm gonna tell this human to go get it. Hey, VTA, make some dopamine. Dopamine gets made. I suddenly get the urge to go get this ice cream. When I get the ice cream, that's when my body then produces endorphins, and I feel great. Dopamine also goes to the PFC, the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is involved in like higher order thinking, rationalizing things, cognition. In simple terms, it stops you from doing stupid things. So, using the ice cream example, second time, I hear the ice cream van, NA goes, bro, go get some ice cream, dopamine gets released. The dopamine's also binding to dopamine receptors in the PFC. PFC is going, hold on, buddy. According to my knowledge, these ice creams have a lot of sugar in them. They're really bad for your health. I don't think you should have an ice cream. That information gets fed back to the NA, and it says, listen, buddy, I don't think you should like hype up this ice cream that much. It's not as exciting as you think it is because it's going to be bad for you. And then the NA goes, all right, I'll reduce like the expectation of this ice cream. So then next time I hear the ice cream van, I'm not as excited to go and get it. So the PFC has a really important role in here. It stops you from being impulsive and emotional in your decision making. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
All right, so how do things go wrong? I'm just being conscious of the time. What time is Salah again? 8:30. Maybe we'll stop here and I'll just explain one more quick thing before we pack up, get ready for Salah. You've heard of the difference between instant gratification and delayed gratification. We're going to talk about it a little bit more later. When you indulge in something without thinking, what's happening is you're not engaging the PFC in that decision making. And the more you keep doing that, the more you disable the PFC. So then you become very impulsive in your decision making. When you do, on the other hand, studies have shown people who don't make impulsive decisions and are happy to wait for rewards or put in effort to get rewards, strengthen the connection with the prefrontal cortex, which means that their decision making is always very rational, it's always very careful, it's always very considered. And that's going to be important in our discussion next. I think we'll stop here and get ready for Salat, and we'll continue afterwards, inshallah. Salah ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
محمد وآل محمد. All right. Let's continue, inshallah. So we introduced the dopamine motivation reward pathway and talked about the importance of dopamine in motivating us to seek reward. And the reward is achieved when we experience the thing that we're trying to experience. When that happens, our body releases pleasure chemicals, one of which are called endorphins, that relieve pain and make us feel pleasure. This happens for anything and everything that stimulates the dopamine reward pathway. All addictions follow the same process. So how does something beautiful like this, which Allah created to motivate us to do things, turn into addiction? How does it go wrong? Let's zoom into this pathway over here. So we said that dopamine travels from the VTA to the NA and the PFC. The way it binds there is by interacting with dopamine receptors. So let's zoom into that and see what happens. Normally, if you've got normal kind of dopamine stimulation, let's say you're excited to go exercise, you need a bit of a boost, your dopamine reward system makes some dopamine, you get the motivation to go exercise, you go exercise, you get a nice reward. What happens? So the dopamine is coming from the VTA, and it binds to receptors. So these are like a key and lock thing. Dopamine is the key, the receptor is the lock, that are present on the cells or the neurons of either the NA structure in your brain or the PFC structure in your brain. When the dopamine binds to the receptor, it excites the neurons in that brain structure to transmit a signal. Now these neurons fire an action potential. They fire an electrical signal. That's how your brain communicates with other parts of the brain. This signal then travels to another part of your brain, and then when you actually experience the thing that you want to do, the pleasure chemicals get released. If, however, I indulge in something too much, or I engage in an activity that is very stimulating, for example, video games. Video games, very easy to access, minimal effort required. I can sit on my couch, I can get my joystick, and I can play as long as I want, and I get massive stimulation, non-stop. What happens is, I'm getting so much dopamine flooding my brain system. Now, because dopamine excites neurons, if you over-excite the neurons die. It's called something like excitoneuratoxicity or something. So your body has a fail-safe mechanism to protect its neurons from getting fried from too much stimulation, from too much excitation. What it does is, it reduces the number of dopamine receptors that are present on the neuron. So as shown in this diagram, we've gone from 5 receptors to 3 receptors. If there's less dopamine receptors for the dopamine to bind to, bind to, there's less chance the dopamine binds, there's less chance the neuron gets excited, there's less chance the neuron gets fried from too much dopamine. However, what this means, because there's less excitation of the neuron, that also means there's less signal being sent to the other parts of the brain to make the pleasure chemicals. So you get less pleasure response from the same level of stimulation. For example, first time you play video games, massive stimulation, pleasure 100%. Second time, you haven't given your body a break to reset yet. You're just hitting it non-stop with dopamine. Or you played 6 hours straight non-stop. So much stimulation. Your body's like, whoa, whoa, dude, slow down, I need to protect myself. Too much excitation here happening. My neurons are going to get fried. I'll start reducing the dopamine receptors. Because it's reduced the dopamine receptors, I start finding the game like less exciting the second time, the third time, the fourth time, or after like the 5th hour of playing. All the people who've played video games here know what I'm talking about. After you've played it for like a week, it's the same game. It should excite you the same amount as it did the first time, but it doesn't. You start to get progressively like less excited playing this game. And this is where the problem arises. If you don't understand that this is your body trying to protect itself, so it can reset to that homeostasis, you will just assume, man, I'm just getting bored of this game. I need more pleasure. I need to indulge more. I need to play more video games. Or if that video game's done, throw that video game, buy another one. I need something new to excite me again. And you keep indulging and indulging and indulging because you misunderstand what signal your body is trying to send to you. And if you do continue indulging, because you keep getting less of a pleasure response, you're starting to get bored, you're like, I need to get more pleasure, more pleasure, more pleasure. You don't give your body a chance to reset. There's nothing your body can do anymore. It's already tried to reduce all the receptors, it's already down-regulated the receptors as much as it can. Now you're just going to start frying those neurons. Those neurons are just going to get constantly bombarded with dopamine excitation. The neurons die. Your brain cells die. And here's the thing about brain cells. 90% of brain cells don't come back to life after they're dead. Once they're gone for good. These cells, once they're gone for good. They don't regenerate. So what happens is, I am now permanently in a state of pain where I'm stimulating myself so much. I'm playing video games, I'm drinking coffee, I'm having like chocolate on the side as well, and I'm getting very minimal pleasure response, very little satisfaction. And now I enter a vicious cycle. Because I still haven't figured out what's happening in my brain. I just feel bored. I feel empty. And I'm like, I need to fill this emptiness with more games, with more stimulation. Hell, games aren't good enough. Let me jump on some pornography. And you just keep getting worse and worse and worse. The more you stimulate, the more you fry your brain, the less the pleasure response, the more you're in pain, the more you want to indulge again to get rid of that pain. The more you indulge, the worse it gets. Vicious cycle. This is addiction. This is exactly what happens in addiction. This is the same process for everything. Whether it's drugs, behavior, whatever. Drugs are a bit more complicated in that there's extra mechanisms on top. But everything follows this exact process. It's all involving the dopamine reward pathway, and this is what's happening. Now, it's not just the NA that gets fried. Your PFC also gets fried, your prefrontal cortex. Remember, we said the prefrontal cortex stops you from doing stupid things, it stops you from being impulsive. What happens if you fry that guy? The moment I see that Big M McDonald's, Big Mac, straight to McDonald's. Hell, forget straight to McDonald's. I can sit on my couch and call an Uber to bring me the Big Mac. There's no cognitive thinking whatsoever. There's no whatsoever. It's not like, oh wait, you're going to get fat, don't do that, it's not good for you. Nah, just straight impulse, emotional response. Because you've fried the neurons in your PFC, you've fried your neurons in your NA, you're just acting on impulse. Just to visually demonstrate what happens to the pleasure response, this is just some drawing I did, okay? It's not scientifically super accurate. But I just want to highlight a few points here. As I already alluded to before, your brain and your body likes to keep things in balance, at homeostasis. Not too excited, not too depressed. When you, for example, do something that's very stimulating like video games, watch pornography, online shopping, drugs, whatever it may be, right? You get a massive pleasure response the first time you experience it. As soon as you deviate from homeostasis, your body is applying an opposing force to bring you back down. It's like you can't stay in this state of high for too long. It's too dangerous. You're going to destroy the neurons. So it tries to pull you back down. The more you indulge, the harder it pulls back. It's like a seesaw. When you finally stop playing video games after like a whole 5 hours at night or whatever, that pleasure feeling plummets. And it goes over into the side of pain. Displeasure. That's why sometimes after you play video games for like 6 hours, you still feel like crap afterwards. Now, then your body needs some time to recover and go back to baseline. Problem is you don't give it that time. The next day you're back on the video games again. Or you're back on social media again. Or you're just constantly on social media, constantly on your phone, constantly stimulating yourself. So your body's trying to calibrate itself, but you've already started stimulating it again. Second stimulation is less than the first one, as we talked about. Tolerance starts to develop. Then you plummet even harder after you're done. And your body's trying to go back to normal again. You're indulging again. You haven't given it time to reset, you're already indulging again. Third time you do it, the pleasure response is even lower. The pain response is even bigger. And the time to recover is even longer. And then you indulge again and again and again, and you keep playing, you keep indulging for weeks, months, years. Not only is the pleasure response significantly reduced, you're now always in a state of pain. The baseline is down here. I don't know if you can see the mouse, but I'm pointing to that last line. Your baseline is down there. It's not here anymore. It's not neutral anymore. You're always depressed. You're always feeling empty. You're always feeling like you need more pleasure. And again, if you don't understand what's going on, what do? You indulge more. You're like, I need something more stimulating. So what can we do to deal with addiction? And again, all of this advice from a psychiatrist from this book. At the end of the day, any advice I give does not replace the advice that you should get from a professional. If you're struggling with any addiction or mental health issues, feel free to try some of these tips, but it should help. He's a neuroscientist podcaster. If you like podcasts, check him out on YouTube. Pretty good. He says addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. Happiness is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure. We'll talk about that in a second. The other thing I didn't mention is when your pleasure response reduces, not only do you experience less pleasure indulging in that thing that you're addicted to, you're experiencing less pleasure in doing anything. Nothing gives you pleasure anymore, right? When you can play video games, which are 10 times more stimulating and not even giving you that pleasure. So everything becomes boring. Everything becomes uninteresting. That's why a lot of kids who are playing video games, their parents are like, hey, come do the dishes. They're like, what the hell would I do that? Hello, Anya, I'm going to play video games. Hey, come out with us to the park. We're going to see your cousin. Stuff that. All I want to do is video games. Why would I drop video games? Why would I drop whatever the hell it is that I'm indulging in? Social media. Why would I put my phone down? It's so accessible, it's so easy and so stimulating. And I experienced this myself. I used to be a gamer myself. I used to find everything so boring. I'm like, why would I do this? Why would I do that? Anyway, don't want to get too personal here. One thing to understand when dealing with addiction, as I talked about before, first you need to try and avoid activities that are very low effort and very high pleasure. A lot of modern forms of entertainment are like that because everything in this digital age can be accessed on your phone. You can do everything from the comfort of your home, sitting on your couch, and you can get maximum stimulation. We've got to really avoid that. It's very hard to do, but we've got to avoid that. Our dopamine system was designed for temporary boosts and temporary stimulation and motivation, not constant chronic stimulation. For example, You go for a hike, you need motivation to get you out of bed, to climb up that difficult mountain, to get to the top, to get that nice reward. Once you get that nice reward of getting to the top of the mountain or finishing that hike, it's very hard to re-indulge again because you need time to rest. So you rest, you take a week off, you recover, and then you do it again. Same thing with like exercise or any other thing that's not addictive. Usually things that are not addictive require more effort to get the reward. The things that are addictive require no effort and give you maximum reward. So it's very hard to stop doing it. As I already talked about before, anytime you choose instant gratification, you're not engaging the prefrontal cortex, you're reinforcing the network that bypasses the prefrontal cortex. So you're slowly becoming more and more impulsive and less able to control yourself. And a really interesting experiment to highlight this, the effect of this, is the marshmallow experiment, which I think a lot of you would have heard before. The marshmallow experiment was done by a Stanford researcher called Walter Mischel in the 1960s. Okay, and he did this on like hundreds of kids. They had kids aged 4 to 5 years old. They would sit the kid in a room, they have a table in front of them, and they put a marshmallow. And he told the kids, I'm going to leave the room. If you don't eat the marshmallow while I'm gone, when I come back, I'll give you a second marshmallow on top. But if you eat it before I come back, you're not getting anything else. Some kids jumped at the marshmallow, ate it before he came back. He only went 15 minutes, by the way. Other kids struggled a bit, but waited and got the second marshmallow. Then they followed up these kids 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, and did a bunch of kind of surveys and tests on them. The kids who didn't eat, the kids who resisted, in other words, they avoided instant reward, instant gratification, they delayed the gratification, had better academic scores, less prone to addiction, less prone to health complications like obesity. They were more resilient to stress, and they scored better in other measures like social skills and other things. Every single time he followed up, the same kids consistently performed better in these scores. Just for avoiding instant gratification and waiting for something better later on. I want to share with you a verse from the Holy Quran. Unfortunately, I think it was chapter 42, verse 20. من كان يريد حرث الآخرة نزد له في حرثه. Whoever wants the harvest of the hereafter, we increase for him his harvest. ومن كان يريد حرث الدنيا نؤته منها وما له في الآخرة من نصيب. And whoever wants the harvest of the dunya, of this world, we'll give him what he wants, but he'll get no share in the hereafter. Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is already teaching us the system of instant versus delayed gratification. And he's training us to wait for a greater reward in the afterlife. If you want to work for this dunya and get your reward now, I'll give it to you. But you're not going to get anything else. However, if you're patient and you wait and you put effort in and you work for the hereafter, I'll increase your reward in the hereafter. It's the exact same experiment as the marshmallow experiment. And this is not the only example. We see many examples in the Quran where Allah says, work now, feed the poor, help the orphans, put effort in now, and I'll award you paradise in the hereafter. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understands our neuroscience. Of course He does. So avoid low effort, high pleasure activities. Put in effort. Do things that require effort that give you a reward. If you're already addicted, there's a couple of things that you can do. These are self-binding practices that Dr. Anna mentions. One is physical self-binding, which involves removing access to this drug or activity that you're indulging in. If you're addicted to video games, you sell your game, you see, or you throw it out. If you're addicted to online shopping, I don't know, You throw your phone away. You don't online shopping. That wasn't a good example. If you're addicted to social media, delete your social media account. If I don't have access to it, I can't do it. Alright? It's a good thing to do, but it doesn't always work if you're really, really addicted to something. If you've been addicted to something for so long and it's very severe, chances are you're going to go back to JB Hi-Fi and buy another gaming PC or another PlayStation, even though you just threw it out. However, it's still good to do. Second one is categorical self-binding. So this is where you you kind of substitute what you're doing for something less severe. Like you create categories to define certain things. You're like, okay, I'm going to avoid that, but I'll still do this. This is where the online shopping example comes in. If I'm addicted to online shopping, I might say I'm going to stop online shopping because online shopping makes me spend so much because it's so easy to do. But I'm still allowed to shop in person because shopping in person requires so much more effort. Like I've got to get out of bed, I've got to go to the store. I'm less likely to do that very often, so I'm less likely to spend too much. Again, this can be a good practice to reduce your addiction, but just remember, reducing the severity of addiction doesn't always work because it's still activating that dopamine reward pathway, and you can easily then kind of progress and go back to doing what you're doing before. But again, this is a really good thing to do for mild addictions. The third one is chronological self-binding. This is where you stop your addictive behavior for a certain period of time. You might say, okay, I'm playing too many video games. I'm going to try and restrict it to 1 hour a day only. Again, this approach can work with some things, but if you're really addicted and you're still indulging in something that is highly stimulating and easy to access, why would you stop at 1 hour? Or you might succeed the first week, but then remember that pleasure response starts to decrease. And then you're like, you know what? What's another half an hour going to do? Or like, oh, I'm really stressed out today. Well, let me indulge a bit more, observe it. And slowly, before you know it, it creeps up back to 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. However, if you adopt the second approach of completely abstaining from it for a long period of time, say 30 days, I completely stop playing video games. I completely stop accessing the internet. I completely stop binge eating, whatever it is. This has been scientifically proven, and it's recommended by lots of psychiatrists to help you overcome almost most addictions. All you need to do is abstain for 30 days. 30 days will give you'll feel like a new person after 30 days. And you'll really appreciate the positive effect it has on you when you stop that addiction. And you won't want to go back. Slight caveat here. If you've been addicted to something that is very stimulating for a long, long period of time, 30 days might not be enough to fully overcome that addiction and that temptation. And you might need 60 days, you might need 90 days. But for most people, most addictions, I'm almost going to say, I promise you, if you fully abstain for 30 days, at least you're going to be so motivated to never want to go back to that. The reason people fail is because the first 2 weeks are super hard. And if you don't realize that it's going to get easier if I just get past those 2 weeks, you'll be like, man, how am I going to survive the rest of my life if it's this hard? What you've got to realize is it's not going to be that hard forever. As soon as you get past that 2-week mark, 3-week mark, and you get to 30 days, it'll be significantly easier, and you already start experiencing the benefits that you won't want to go back to it. But I would suggest combining all three of these together. Don't try and abstain for 30 days from playing video games while your gaming PC is right there in your bedroom, so accessible. Get rid of it and then abstain. Now, some people might have tried this and struggled and still failed because there is another complicating factor. And the other complicating factor is stress. Stress is the most common trigger of relapse for people who are addicted to things. So let's talk about stress. Your body is actually built to handle acute stress. Acute meaning like short term, like short exposures to stress. And some people even argue that acute stress is good for you. It helps you develop resilience. It can even help you boost your immunity, etc. Your body has a mechanism to protect you from acute stress. That mechanism is a hormone called cortisol. Now, there's a brain structure in your brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is the thing that scans your environment for any threats. It's the thing that detects stressful situations. In the early days of humans, the kind of stress that they experienced was mostly acute stress. They're out hunting, looking for food. They come across a ferocious lion. Amygdala's like, whoa, alarms go off, sirens go off. This lion's going to eat me. And it goes into action. And it does three things. It communicates with another structure in your brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus stores a memory of this stressful event so that you don't, so you can try and avoid it next time. So it stores, okay, lion is ferocious, scary, this lion likes to live near this river, stay away from this river. Or, for example, let's say you're sleeping at night and you hear a very strange sound outside, and you get up and you investigate and you find out it was just a bird. Again, your hippocampus will store that. And then the next time you sleep, the next day, you hear that sound again. Instead of activating the whole stress response, the hippocampus tells you, amygdala, chill bro, it's just that bird again, you don't need to react. The amygdala also then activates your dopamine reward system. It triggers dopamine release so that you have motivation, so that you can do something about this stressful event, right? And as we talked about, dopamine also connects with your PFC and helps you with rational decision making. This is important in a stressful event. Finally, the amygdala, through the HPA axis, don't worry about what that is, communicates to your adrenal gland to make this hormone cortisol, and cortisol does a bunch of amazing things. It essentially activates that fight or flight response. And it does that by doing a number of things, including producing adrenaline. It tells your liver to break down and more sugar, so that you have access, you have more sugar in your blood and access to more energy. It increases your blood pressure and blood flow to your muscles and your brain, so that they can access that sugar and that energy. And it increases your alertness. And your PFC helps you decide whether you should fight this lion, if you're strong enough, or get the hell out of there. So in a nutshell, your body's cortisol, the cortisol response to stress is to kind of make you superhuman for a short period of time, so that you can get the hell out of there or fight. And then once you're done, once you get out of that situation, you get a bit hungry. That's why a lot of people binge eat after they're stressed. You're meant to just recover. Basically, your body's telling you to recover all that energy that you just spent in that stressful situation. The problem is, in the modern world, in the modern society, we don't really have a lot of acute stresses. We're not encountering lions, we're not out in the bushes. And that might be a good thing. But the problem is, it's been replaced with something worse. Chronic stress. We're always stressed now. We're working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Pretty much all of our jobs are stressful. Our studies can be stressful. And chronic stress, your body's not built to deal with chronic stress. Chronic stress is no good. Okay? There's no way to justify chronic stress. If you're constantly stressed, your amygdala is constantly active, it's constantly stimulating your hippocampus. What happens to your hippocampus? It gets fried. It starts to shrink. There's been brain images done on people who are chronically stressed, and they've shown this. Their hippocampus is smaller. Instead of storing memories, you actually start losing memories. People with chronic stress can develop dementia. It's also constantly stimulating your dopamine system. And what do we say about constantly stimulating your dopamine system? You're just going to be constantly trying to seek pleasure. That's why when you're stressed after work, what do you want to do? You want to indulge. You want to eat chocolate. You want to watch TV, you want that reward because your dopamine system is overstimulated. If your dopamine system is overstimulated, your PFC gets fried, your prefrontal cortex gets fried. No more rational thinking, very impulsive. No more inhibition of your desires. No self-control. If your cortisol levels are constantly high, remember what cortisol does. Increases blood sugar, increases blood pressure. Too much blood sugar all the time, diabetes. Too much blood pressure, stroke, heart failure. What else? Too much alertness. Can't sleep. Sleep disorders. Sleep disorders cause all kinds of problems. And then you get depression and anxiety. Your body's not designed to be constantly stressed. It's not healthy. It's not how society should be. So what can we do about it? Well, the other thing I didn't mention, chronic stress also decreases your serotonin, which is what we're going to talk about next. This is the light at the end of the tunnel, serotonin. We talked about pleasure, we talked about addiction, we talked about stress. Now we're going to talk about the happy chemical. The chemical that gives you happiness and contentment, which is what we should be pursuing. Serotonin is really interesting, but it's much less studied than dopamine, which is why this slide is very empty. 90% of your serotonin is actually in your GI tract, it's in your gut, doing completely different things. 9% is in your blood, only 1% is in your brain. And that 1% regulates mood, happiness, contentment. Has over 15 targets in the brain. Each target modulates a different kind of happiness. And this has been proven. Low serotonin causes depression. That's why when you have depression, they give you serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which basically increase the amount of serotonin in your brain. And that is very effective for treating depression. Too much serotonin is also bad, but it's very hard to have too much serotonin naturally. You can only get too much serotonin if you overdose on these drugs, which increase serotonin levels. Think about serotonin. Dopamine was excitatory. It excites neurons. Remember, too much excitation fries the neurons. Serotonin is inhibitory. It can't fry neurons. So you can't really get like an addiction from like a good amount of serotonin. It doesn't make sense. And the great thing about serotonin is it actually calms you down. It calms things down. It inhibits excessive excitation in the brain. It inhibits too much dopamine. SubhanAllah. It's regulating your state of being, basically. And that's why you feel content and happy when you have good levels of serotonin or when you engage in activity that boosts your serotonin. Activities which boost serotonin, this is what I have found in my research. Sun exposure. You ever felt that? Nice sunny day, you go out, you soak in the sun, you just feel so good. Or like it's a nice sunny day, what's the first thing you guys think? Oh, we need to go out and do something. It's such a good day out. Sun exposure boosts serotonin. Being in nature, surprise, surprise. How many times have we said that in Barakah programs then? Get out there. Connect with nature a bit more. It's a fitri thing too. It's spiritual. Meditation, mindfulness. We've got the best form of meditation and mindfulness. We've got prayer, we've got dhikr. We don't need modern mindfulness practices. We just need to engage more with our prayer and our salat and our supplication. All of this is proven to boost serotonin levels. Being part of a community, a social network, having that sense of belonging, boosts your serotonin. Spending time with loved ones and friends boosts serotonin. Stop chatting to your friends on WhatsApp. Pick a time, pick a place, hang out with them physically. Better yet, hang out with your fellow Muslim brothers and sisters, because then there's the added spiritual effect. Giving charity. It sounds like I'm reading verses from the Quran now. Giving charity boosts serotonin. Helping others. Doing any selfless act. Volunteering for a higher purpose or any organization. As long as it's for a higher purpose and not for something selfish, it boosts serotonin. As soon as it becomes a selfish motive, dopamine again. SubhanAllah. Everything that boosts serotonin is pretty much linked with things that which awaken and help boost your fitra and your spirituality. Okay, let's recap before I get to the last slide. Dopamine, reward pathway, is involved in motivating you to do things. It's a good system. You need it to have the will to live, to do things. You need it every now and then in short bursts to motivate you to overcome challenges, to do things which require effort to get a reward. It's good for you. The problem is, in modern society, everything is so effortless. You don't need to do anything to get massive stimulation and massive reward and massive pleasure. That's not good for us. Instant reward is not good for us. We've got to, as tempting as it is, avoid instant reward. Focus on things which require effort and give us benefits and give us rewards in a controlled way. Take a break in between. Pleasure is not our goal. Our goal is not to pursue pleasure. Pleasure does not make us happy. Pleasure is just the reward for doing things which require effort. Like you need to study to achieve a goal, to become a doctor or whatever you want to become. So you need an incentive. It's not designed to be the main purpose, the main drive for your entire life. I'm constantly trying to seek pleasure. That's not going to make me happy. What's going to make me happy is boosting my serotonin levels. Stress is the complicated in all of this. Okay, there's no two ways around it. If you don't manage your stress, it's going to be very hard for you to have a healthy life. Stress literally kills you slowly. So, recommendations. And again, this is compiled from research and these books from other experts. I know we've heard this a lot. 7 to 8 hours of sleep is absolutely imperative. You have to get adequate sleep. Okay? Make it an absolute pledge after you leave tonight that you will consistently get 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. I can't stress this enough. Not sleeping 7 to 8 hours and getting sleep deprivation, listen to what it does to you. Increase stress levels. Stress destroys everything. But it does decrease sleep quality. Decreased sleep quality means more stress. More stress means worse sleep quality. Vicious cycle. So easy to get out of control. Not to mention all the other negative health effects of stress that we talked about. Sleep deprivation increases your dopamine. Too much dopamine. Very prone to addiction again. Constantly pursuing pleasure again. Hubb ad-dunya again. Decreases serotonin, the good guy. The guy that's trying to make you happy. Your prefrontal cortex function also gets destroyed. You stop thinking rationally. You become impulsive again. And there's other things. Immune function goes down. It's not sleeping is the worst thing you can do. Like not getting that 8 hours of sleep is the worst thing you can do. It's one simple fix that you can change in your life to improve your overall mood. As we already talked about, doing things which boost serotonin and not overindulging in things which boost dopamine. A dopamine reward pathway is not meant to be constantly stimulated. Things which boost serotonin, selfless activities, we talked about it. Other fitra enhancing activities. Why not add some religious activities in there? Boost. You want your mind and body to be healthy, but you also want your soul to be healthy. Reading, studying Quran, teaching Zahid al-Bayt, connecting with nature, prayer, dhikr, supplication. If you're stressed out, find relief with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't need to pursue something pleasurable. You don't need to indulge. Exercise. Exercise is a really good one. Exercise has been shown to have antidepressant effects because it boosts serotonin again. Avoid addictive substances and activities. Choose delayed rewards over instant rewards. You don't actually need to overindulge in things, and you'll probably save a lot of money and time if you do that. Processed food is all addictive. Make no mistake about it. All of it has added sugars in it. Try and cook your own food. Even if it's not the healthiest, it'll be better than what you're getting in the supermarket and McDonald's. Try and reduce stress. I know this is really hard, and And sometimes you don't have control over your bosses and where you're working, but try and get some control. Try and discuss with them. Try and manage with them, manage your work schedule. Try and do 4 days a week, 5 days a week, instead of 5 days a week. And if your work is just so stressful, honestly, look for another job. Why do you need to work in the occupation? Why do you need to have that salary? You don't need it. There's been studies we've done which have showed that people who value financial success and income over like their own personal development are less content and happy. And you actually don't need too much money to be happy. You just need enough to survive. That's all I had. I'm getting ushered to finish, but I do have just one more thing I want to say, because we've talked about the dunya as if it's a negative thing, but the dunya is actually not a negative thing. And I want to share with you part of a sermon from Barakah from Imam Ali alayhi salam, where it's very short, where he hears a person talking badly about the dunya. And he says to him, I'll just say the English part. And actually, I'll just paraphrase parts of the English part. He says, indeed, the world is a place of well-being for those who understand it. The dunya, that is. It is a place of wealth for those who gather from it for the afterlife, not for this life. It is a place of admonition for those who heed its lessons. It is a mosque for the beloved of God, a prayer ground for the angels of God, a marketplace for the friends of God. They earn mercy from it and profit in it by attaining paradise. That's the original intention of the dunya. To increase your ma'rifah of Allah, to make it a place where you acquire for your akhirah. Fortunately, things have changed in the modern society. People have become more selfish and human-centric. They've moved away from God. Everybody's greedy. Everybody's just trying to make money. We've become very addicted to pleasure-seeking behaviors. So inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us overcome our vices and our addictions and help us develop good habits, inshallah, with this knowledge and knowledge from the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أحسنت.
Thank you, Mouhamad, for that insightful talk. It was packed with useful information I'm sure we have all benefited from. We will now be having our interactive activity for tonight. Iftikhar will be running tonight's activity, so please welcome him with a loud salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Following Mohammed's very informative lecture, we're going to do an activity where the team's going to hand out some papers and everyone's going to list down the activities for the week, and we're going to categorize it into three categories: pleasure, happiness and stress. So can the team please hand out the papers?